The skies of Zorelia bled crimson at dusk. The horizon, a violent painting of war's aftermath. Ionized air still crackled with the memory of plasma fire, and the ground bore scars of battles fought over territories no one could remember the original names of anymore. This was the stage upon which the final acts of a generations-long conflict would unfold, though none of the actors yet knew their parts. Queen Shiraline of the Zarelian people stood atop a ridge overlooking what had once been the sacred valley of Mithril. Her snake-scaled armor gleamed gold and obsidian in the dying light, catching the red sunbeams and transforming them into something both beautiful and terrible. The heavy mantle of leadership weighed upon her shoulders more heavily than any physical armor could. "Your Majesty," her chief strategist approached. "The Syndicate forces have withdrawn to the eastern ridge. Intelligence suggests they are regrouping for another assault by morning." Shiraline nodded, her iridescent eyes, multifaceted like those of Earth's dragonflies, scanning the horizon. The human contingent of her allied forces had set up camp at the foot of the ridge, their technology a crude but effective complement to Zarelian weaponry. She had her doubts about these pink-skinned creatures with their strange customs and stranger sense of humor. But the alliance treaty had left her little choice. "Double the night watch," she commanded, "and have the human commander report to me immediately." The strategist bowed and departed, leaving Shiraline to her thoughts. The war with the Syndicate had raged for 3 decades, consuming resources, lives, and hope in equal measure. The Zarelian people were warriors by tradition, but even the mightiest race could be brought to its knees by prolonged conflict. Her decision to accept Earth's offer of military support had been controversial among her council, viewed by many traditionalists as a sign of weakness. As twilight deepened, heavy footsteps announced the arrival of the human she'd summoned. Turning, she found herself face to face with the soldier they called Jimmy, a peculiar name even by human standards. He stood a head shorter than her, with none of the natural majesty her species possessed, yet carried himself with an easy confidence that she found both irritating and oddly admirable. "You called for me, Your Highness?" he asked, offering a salute that managed to be both respectful and somehow casual. A plasma rifle hung from his shoulder strap, a weapon he'd affectionately named Betsy in the strange human custom of anthropomorphizing inanimate objects. "Commander," she began, then corrected herself. "Lieutenant Harker, your forces are positioned too far from our main defense line. Should the Syndicate launch a night assault—" "With all due respect, Your Majesty," Jimmy interrupted, a breach of protocol that sent ripples of offense through her guard. "That's exactly what we want them to think. We've got motion sensors and plasma mines covering every approach. Anyone tries to flank through our position, they'll light up brighter than a Christmas tree." Shiraline's face remained impassive, though inwardly she bristled at his presumption. The Syndicate employs stealth technology capable of bypassing standard motion detection. Jimmy grinned, patting his rifle. "That's why we've got Betsy and her sisters. Sometimes the old ways work best. Human eyes watching the darkness. My team's been fighting these purple bastards." He caught himself. "I mean, the enemy, for 2 years now. We know their tricks." Before Shiraline could respond, the unmistakable whine of approaching plasma cutters split the air. Jimmy's expression hardened instantly, years of combat training taking over as he shouted, "Down!" and lunged toward her. In the chaos that followed, Shiraline would remember only fragments: the flash of a stealth suit deactivating, the gleam of a plasma blade arcing toward her neck, the unexpected weight of the human soldier throwing himself into its path. The blade, meant for her throat, sliced across Jimmy's chest instead, leaving a scorching trail of superheated flesh and burned fabric. Her royal guards converged, dispatching the assassin with practiced efficiency. But the damage was done. The human lay bleeding on the rocky ground, his life essence pooling beneath him in an expanding crimson circle. Get the medical team, Shirlene ordered, kneeling beside the fallen soldier. Now! Jimmy's eyes fluttered open, unfocused with pain. Did we get him? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, Shirlene replied, surprising herself with the gentleness in her tone. You saved my life, human. A weak smile crossed his face. Just doing my job, Your Majesty. His eyes closed again as the medical team arrived, their equipment humming to life around his prone form. As they worked to stabilize him, Shirlene's chief counselor approached, her expression grave. Your Majesty, the human has invoked the law of life debt, whether he knows it or not. A cold weight settled in Shirlene's stomach. The law of life debt was one of the oldest and most sacred traditions of her people, when one's life was saved at great personal risk by another. A bond was formed that could not be broken until the debt was repaid in kind. For a queen to owe such a debt to a human, the political implications were staggering. Prepare the royal medical chamber, she commanded, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. The human will receive treatment befitting one to whom I owe a life debt. As they carried Jimmy's unconscious form toward her ship, Shirlene gazed at the blood staining her armor, human blood, shed in her defense. Something unfamiliar stirred within her, something dangerously close to respect. The war had just become infinitely more complicated. Jimmy awoke to the gentle hum of unfamiliar machinery and the sensation of thousands of tiny pinpricks across his chest. Opening his eyes, he found himself in a chamber bathed in pale blue light, suspended in a gossamer network of metallic filaments that seemed to be woven into his very skin. Don't move, a voice commanded from somewhere to his left. The nano-regeneration web is still calibrating to your human physiology. Turning his head slightly, the only movement the web seemed to allow, Jimmy saw Queen Shirlene approaching. She had exchanged her battle armor for flowing robes of silver and blue, the colors of healing in Xyrillian culture, though he suspected she didn't expect him to know that. Your Majesty, he croaked, his throat painfully dry. Fancy seeing you here. Is this the royal dungeon? Nicer than I expected. Something that might have been amusement flickered across her alien features, before disappearing behind her customary mask of regal dignity. This is the royal medical chamber, reserved for members of my house. You are here because you have invoked the law of life debt. Jimmy attempted a shrug, wincing as the motion sent ripples of pain through his chest. Just doing my job, ma'am. No debt necessary. It is not a matter of choice, human, Shirlene replied, moving closer to examine the readouts on a floating display panel. By our most ancient laws, when one saves the life of another at great personal risk, a bond is formed that cannot be severed until the debt is repaid. As you saved my life, I am now bound to preserve yours. So, I'm getting the premium healthcare package. Can't complain about that. Shirlene's multifaceted eyes narrowed slightly. It is more complicated. Until the debt is repaid, you are considered both protector and property of my house. Your welfare is my responsibility. Your honor, an extension of my own. Jimmy blinked slowly, processing this information. Wait, did you just say property? Like a pet? Or more like a slave? Because I've got to tell you, Your Majesty, humans have some pretty strong feelings about that kind of arrangement. Neither, she responded, though her tone suggested she found the distinction trivial. It is a sacred bond of obligation. Your people would perhaps understand it as a blood oath or a lifelong vow. Sounds intense, Jimmy muttered. How exactly does one repay a life debt? Shirlene turned away, her robes flowing around her like liquid silver. Traditionally, it is repaid by saving the life of the one who saved yours, at equal or greater risk to yourself. Until such time, we are bound together by forces older than my kingdom. Great, Jimmy sighed, staring up at the ceiling. So I'm stuck with you until I can throw myself in front of another blade. Any chance of getting some real food in here? This IV stuff isn't cutting it." A Xyrillian medical technician approached, clearly horrified by Jimmy's casual tone when addressing the queen. Shirlene, however, merely inclined her head slightly. "I will have suitable nourishment brought," she said, turning to leave. "Rest now. The healing web will complete its work within 12 of your Earth hours." As she reached the doorway, Jimmy called after her. "Hey, Your Majesty, thanks for not letting me die out there." Shirlene paused, not turning back. "I am merely honoring the debt. Human. Nothing more." But there was something in her voice, a slight softening, that suggested otherwise. After she departed, the medical technician approached cautiously, adjusting the settings on the healing web. "You should show more respect when addressing Her Majesty," he admonished in heavily accented English. Jimmy grinned weakly. "Where I come from, saving someone's life earns you the right to skip a few formalities. Your Earth customs are irrelevant here," the technician replied stiffly. "The life debt is sacred. Her Majesty has honored you beyond measure by bringing you to the royal chambers." "Yeah, well, getting stabbed for someone tends to create a certain bond, wouldn't you say?" Jimmy winced as a particularly strong pulse went through the healing web. "What's your name, anyway?" The technician looked startled by the question. "I am Thalax, third-rank medical technician." "Nice to meet you, Thalax. I'm Jimmy. Since we're going to be seeing a lot of each other while this thing—" he nodded toward the healing web— "does its magic, maybe we could try being friendly." Thalax's expression remained neutral, but Jimmy thought he detected a slight softening around his eyes. "I will return with nutrition suitable for human consumption," he said, and departed with the peculiar gliding gait of the Xyrillian people. Left alone, Jimmy examined his surroundings more carefully. The chamber was spacious, with walls that seemed to shift between solid and translucent. Beyond them, he could make out the stars. They were aboard a spacecraft. Then, not in the ground facility he'd assumed. His plasma rifle, Betsy, had been placed on a stand near the bed, cleaned and apparently serviced. The gesture was unexpected. Most alien species treated human weapons with disdain. The healing web pulsed again, sending warmth through his injured chest. According to the mission briefing, Xyrillian medical technology was centuries beyond Earth's, capable of regenerating tissue and even limbs given enough time. If he was being treated with their best tech, he'd probably be combat-ready within days, rather than the weeks or months Earth medicine would require. As he lay there, watching the stars through the translucent walls, Jimmy reflected on the strange turn his mission had taken. He'd been deployed to Xyrillia as part of Earth's commitment to the Alliance, expecting to fight alongside the Xyrillians, but maintain the professional distance typical of such arrangements. Now, through a quirk of fate and alien culture, he found himself bound to their queen by what amounted to a mystical oath. "Mom always said I had a gift for complicating simple situations," he murmured to himself, feeling the edges of sleep creeping in as the healing web administered another dose of whatever analgesic they used. His last conscious thought was to wonder how Command would react when they learned one of their lieutenants had become the personal bodyguard to alien royalty. 3 days later, Jimmy walked beside Queen Shirlene through the crystal corridors of the Xyrillian flagship. Eternal vigilance. His wound had healed remarkably well, leaving only a thin silver scar across his chest, a scar he'd been told would eventually fade completely. Despite the medical officer's protests that he should rest further, Jimmy had insisted on resuming his duties. If he was going to be bound to the Queen by some ancient alien custom, he might as well make himself useful. Xyrillian guards lined the corridor, their posture stiffening even further as the Queen passed. Their eyes followed Jimmy with barely concealed suspicion, many of them clearly uncomfortable with a human walking so closely to their monarch. "Your people don't seem thrilled about our arrangement," Jimmy observed quietly. Shirley's pace didn't falter. The life debt is respected, but that does not mean all approve of its application to an outsider. Many believe I should have found a way to circumvent the ancient law. Could you have? He asked, genuinely curious. A slight pause. No. The law of life debt predates our written history. To break it would be to break the foundation upon which our society is built. So I'm stuck with you. And you're stuck with me, Jimmy concluded. At least until one of us saves the other's life again. That is a simplification, but essentially correct, Shirley replied. There are protocols you must learn. As one bound to the royal house, your behavior reflects upon me. You will need instruction in court etiquette, formal address, the sacred rituals. Jimmy couldn't suppress a chuckle. Humans have a saying, in for a penny, in for a pound. Seems like I'm in for the whole royal package. Shirley slowed, turning her iridescent gaze upon him. You find our customs amusing? Not amusing exactly, Jimmy clarified, recognizing the dangerous ground he was treading on. Just complex. Humans tend to make things simpler. Someone saves your life. You say thanks, and maybe buy them a drink. You don't usually bind yourself to them with mystical oaths. And that is why your species struggles with concepts of true honor and obligation, she replied, though there was less judgment in her tone than he might have expected. They reached a massive set of doors inlaid with what appeared to be living crystal. It pulsed with inner light, responding to Shirley's proximity. The doors parted silently, revealing a vast intelligence chamber dominated by a holographic display of the surrounding star system. Several Xyrillian officers stood around the display, their conversation halting abruptly as the Queen entered. They bowed deeply, eyeing Jimmy with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. Continue, Shirley commanded, taking her place at the head of the display. The senior intelligence officer cleared his throat. As I was reporting, Your Majesty, we have detected significant syndicate movement beyond the Vorak Nebula. Their fleet has been reinforced with 3 heavy cruisers and accompanying support vessels. Assault formation, Shirley asked. Defensive, primarily. They appear to be consolidating rather than preparing for immediate attack. Jimmy studied the holographic display, noting the positioning of the syndicate forces. After a moment's hesitation, he spoke. They're not being defensive. They're setting up a flanking maneuver. All eyes turned to him, most reflecting shock at his presumption in speaking without being addressed. Shirley, however, merely raised an eyebrow. Explain. Jimmy stepped forward, pointing to the hologram. These cruisers aren't in standard defensive formation. They're positioned to create a blind spot in our sensor coverage. Here. His finger traced a path through the nebula. That's the perfect corridor for a stealth insertion team, like the one that almost got you 3 days ago. The intelligence officer bristled. Human tactics are not... Check the neutrino emissions from this sector, Jimmy interrupted, indicating another area of the display. If they've got cloaked ships moving into position, you'll see a spike even if your standard sensors can't detect them. Shirley nodded to a technician, who quickly ran the suggested scan. After a moment, the display updated, showing faint traces exactly where Jimmy had indicated. 5 vessels, moving slowly through the nebula. The technician confirmed, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. An assassination team, Jimmy concluded. Probably targeting you again. Your Majesty, the attack 3 days ago was just a test run. This is the real attempt. Shirley studied him with newfound interest. You determined this from a brief examination of our tactical display? Jimmy shrugged. I've been fighting the Syndicate for 2 years. They're predictable once you understand their playbook. Plus, Betsy and I have taken down our share of their stealth operatives. Betsy, one of the officers questioned. My rifle, Jimmy explained, patting the weapon at his side. She's got a nose for Syndicate agents. The officers exchanged glances that clearly questioned his sanity, but Shirley raised a hand to silence their murmurs. "Implement countermeasures," she ordered. "I want those stealth vessels tracked and neutralized before they reach our perimeter." She turned to Jimmy. "You will assist in planning the defense. Your experience with syndicate tactics may prove valuable." Jimmy nodded, suppressing a smile at the barely concealed outrage on the faces of several officers. "Happy to help, Your Majesty. I promised I wouldn't let you die again, and I aim to keep that promise." Something flickered in Shirley's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or an emotion Jimmy couldn't identify. But in that moment, he thought he glimpsed a crack in the regal facade, a hint that beneath the crown and protocol, the Xyrillian queen might be capable of seeing him as something more than an obligation. The moment passed quickly as she turned back to her officers, issuing commands with practiced authority. But as they set to work, preparing defenses against the syndicate's next move, Jimmy sensed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The officers still regarded him with suspicion, but there was a new undercurrent of reluctant respect. He had proven useful, and in the midst of war, usefulness often trumped tradition. Through the massive viewport, Zoralia gleamed below them, a world of crystalline cities and rivers of molten gold, beautiful and alien. Jimmy wondered if he would ever set foot on its surface, or if his fate was now tied permanently to the stars and to the enigmatic queen who ruled them. Either way, he decided, as he studied the tactical display with renewed focus, he had a job to do, and James Jimmy Harker had never been one to shirk his responsibilities, even when they came wrapped in ancient alien oaths. The next 48 hours were a blur of preparations, strategy sessions, and equipment checks. Jimmy found himself immersed in Xyrillian military protocol, which was simultaneously more rigid and more elegant than Earth's. Despite their initial resistance, the Queen's officers gradually began to incorporate his suggestions, particularly regarding counter-stealth measures. Shirley herself remained a puzzle, formal and distant in official settings, yet occasionally showing flashes of curiosity about Earth and its customs during their brief private interactions. She had assigned him quarters adjacent to her own, a practical arrangement given his new status as her bound protector, but one that raised eyebrows among the court. "Your world has no equivalent to the life debt?" she asked him, as they reviewed security protocols in her private chambers on the eve of the expected syndicate attack. Jimmy shook his head, running a cleaning rod through Betsy's barrel. "Not exactly. We have concepts of honor and obligation. Sure, but nothing as binding as your tradition." "Yet you risked your life for mine without such obligation," she observed. "Why?" He looked up, meeting her iridescent gaze. "It's my job to protect allies, but honestly, it was instinct. Someone was about to die and I could prevent it. Most humans would have done the same." "Most?" Her head tilted slightly in the Xyrillian expression of skepticism. "Well, the decent ones," Jimmy amended with a small smile. "We're not all heroes." Before she could respond, the ship's alert system blared to life, bathing the chamber in pulsing red light. "Perimeter breach in Sector 7, announced a calm voice over the intercom. "All security personnel to battle stations." Jimmy was on his feet instantly, Betsy fully assembled and humming with charged plasma. "That's on the opposite side from where we expected the attack," he said, frowning. "They're trying to draw forces away from—" The ship shuddered violently, throwing them both against the wall. Secondary alarms joined the first, creating a cacophony of warning signals. "Hull breach in Royal Sector," the intercom voice reported, now with distinct urgency. "Intruders detected. Royal Guard to the Queen's chambers immediately." They used the first breach as a diversion, Jimmy realized aloud. "The real target is you, just as we suspected." Shirlene moved to a concealed panel in the wall, retrieving a slender plasma sword that ignited with a violet glow. "The Royal Guard will not reach us in time," she stated with calm certainty. "We must move to the secure command deck." Jimmy nodded, taking up position by the door. "Stay behind me, if we encounter hostiles." "I have been fighting this war since before your birth, human," Shirlene interrupted, her sword humming with deadly energy. "Do not presume to instruct me in combat." Despite the gravity of the situation, Jimmy grinned. "Wouldn't dream of it, Your Majesty. Just trying to fulfill my end of this life-debt business." They moved into the corridor, which was now filled with acrid smoke from damaged systems. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as they advanced toward the command deck. Jimmy leading with Betsy, raised and ready. Shirlene close behind with her plasma sword. They had covered perhaps half the distance when the first Syndicate operatives appeared. 3 figures in sleek black armor emerging from side corridors. Weapons raised. Jimmy fired without hesitation. A burst of concentrated plasma that caught the lead operative in the chest, sending him crumpling to the floor. Shirlene moved with preternatural grace, her sword slicing through the second attacker's weapon before finding his throat. The third operative launched himself at Jimmy, a vibroblade extending from his gauntlet. Jimmy parried with Betsy's reinforced barrel, the clash sending sparks flying, before driving his combat knife into a gap in the attacker's armor. More Syndicate forces converged from adjoining corridors. Jimmy and Shirlene found themselves fighting back-to-back, her sword a violet blur, his rifle spitting deadly plasma bursts with mechanical precision. "Not bad for royalty," Jimmy called over his shoulder as Shirlene dispatched another attacker. "Not bad for a human," she returned. And Jimmy was almost certain he detected amusement in her voice. They fought their way through to a maintenance shaft, avoiding the main corridors where Syndicate forces were concentrated. The narrow confines made Shirlene's sword less effective, but Jimmy's compact rifle worked perfectly in the tight space. "The command deck is 2 levels up," Shirlene informed him, as they paused at a junction. "This shaft will take us to the auxiliary control room, from which we can access the secure elevator." Jimmy nodded, trying to catch his breath. A plasma round had grazed his arm during the fight, leaving a painful burn, but it was nothing compared to his previous injury. "You're wounded," Shirlene observed, her eyes on his arm. "It's nothing," he dismissed. "Let's keep moving." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary, something unreadable in its depths. Then she turned and continued up the shaft, Jimmy following close behind. They had nearly reached the auxiliary control room when disaster struck. A section of the shaft ahead exploded inward, sending debris flying toward them. Jimmy reacted instinctively, pulling Shirlene behind him as shrapnel tore through the space she had occupied a moment before. Through the newly created hole poured more Syndicate operatives. These equipped with full stealth gear that rendered them almost invisible, except for slight distortions in the air. "Fall back!" Jimmy shouted, firing a continuous stream of plasma bolts to cover their retreat. One found its mark, causing a stealth suit to malfunction and reveal its wearer, who collapsed with a smoking hole in his chest. They retreated to a junction where the shaft widened enough for Shirlene to use her sword effectively. Together, they held off the advancing operatives. But it was clear they were being corralled, driven toward some predetermined location where a greater force waited. "We cannot reach the command deck this way," Shirlene stated, decapitating an operative who ventured too close. "We must find another route." Jimmy's mind raced, recalling the ship schematics he'd studied over the past days. "The ceremonial hall," he suggested between bursts of fire. "It connects to the Royal Observatory, which has a direct lift to the command level." Shirlene nodded sharply. "A sound strategy. The hall has only 2 entrances, easily defensible." They changed direction, fighting their way toward the ceremonial hall. The ship continued to shudder periodically. The Syndicate attack on the outer hull was clearly ongoing, designed to keep the majority of the Xyrillian forces occupied while the assassination team completed its mission. As they approached the entrance to the ceremonial hall, Jimmy felt a growing sense of unease. The Syndicate forces had suddenly become less aggressive, almost as if... "It's a trap," he realized aloud, grabbing Shiralene's arm to halt her advance. "They've been hurting us here." She stared at him, then at his hand on her arm, a breach of protocol that would normally result in severe consequences. But these were not normal circumstances. "Explain," she demanded. "They're too coordinated, too willing to fall back when we resist. They want us to go to the ceremonial hall." Jimmy's eyes narrowed as he thought through the implications. It's a perfect kill box. High ceilings, open space, multiple vantage points for snipers. Shiralene considered this, then nodded decisively. "What do you propose instead?" Jimmy grinned, a plan forming. "They expect us to avoid the trap once we realize it exists, so we spring it, on our terms." He quickly outlined his strategy. Shiralene listened, her expression shifting from skepticism to reluctant approval. "A risky gambit," she concluded, "but potentially effective." "That's my specialty," Jimmy replied, checking Betsy's charge. "Ready to make some syndicate agents regret their career choices?" For the first time since he'd met her, Queen Shiralene of the Xyrillian people smiled, a predatory expression that reminded Jimmy that beneath the regal exterior lay a warrior born. "Lead on, human," she said, her plasma sword humming with renewed energy. "Let us spring this trap." They approached the ceremonial hall cautiously, making no attempt to conceal their presence. As Jimmy had predicted, the vast chamber beyond the ornate doors was suspiciously empty, its high ceilings and crystal pillars offering perfect concealment for ambushers. "Remember the plan," Jimmy murmured as they entered. "On my signal." Shiralene inclined her head slightly, moving to the center of the hall with imperial confidence. Her sword held casually at her side as if she suspected nothing. Jimmy flanked her, Betsy at the ready, his eyes scanning the upper galleries. They had reached the midpoint of the hall when the trap was sprung. Stealth fields deactivated simultaneously, revealing at least 20 syndicate operatives positioned around the chamber's perimeter and in the upper galleries. At their center stood a tall figure in ornate black armor, adorned with arcane symbols. Clearly, the leader of the assassination team. "Queen Shiralene," the figure's voice echoed metallically through the hall. "The Syndicate sends its regards." "Death Priest," Shiralene replied, her voice betraying no fear. "I should have known the Seventh Star Cult would send its prized killer." The Death Priest raised a hand, and crackling dark energy coalesced around his fingers. "Your reign ends today, Your Majesty. The Syndicate will claim Zoralia, and the cult will cleanse it of your line's corruption." "Fancy speech," Jimmy interjected, earning a baleful glare from the Death Priest. "But we've heard it all before. Evil overlord, grand plans, blah blah blah. Can we skip to the part where we kick your ass?" The Death Priest's response was a bolt of dark energy that streaked toward Jimmy with lethal intent. He dove aside, rolling behind a crystal pillar as the energy blast shattered the floor where he had stood. That was the signal, as planned. Shiralene activated the device Jimmy had given her, a modified Earth flashbang grenade designed to overload stealth suit sensors. The resulting pulse of electromagnetic energy swept through the hall, causing the Syndicate operatives' stealth systems to malfunction spectacularly. In the confusion that followed, Jimmy and Shiralene separated, each targeting a different section of the ambushers. Betsy sang in Jimmy's hands, plasma bolts finding their marks with deadly accuracy. Shiralene became a whirlwind of violet energy, her sword cleaving through armor and flesh with equal ease. But the Death Priest remained unaffected by the electronic disruption. His armor apparently shielded against such tactics. He advanced on Shiralene, dark energy swirling around his own weapon, a twisted mirror of her plasma sword, crackling with malevolent power. Their blades met in a clash of opposing energies, violet against midnight black, light against darkness. The force of the collision sent shockwaves through the hall, shattering the nearest crystal pillars. Jimmy continued to thin the ranks of the Syndicate forces, but his attention was increasingly drawn to the duel at the center of the hall. The Death Priest was a formidable opponent, his corrupted plasma blade matching Shiralene's strike for strike. Worse, Jimmy could see that the Queen was tiring. The continuous shipwide attack, the running battles through the corridors, and now, this intense duel were taking their toll. Her movements, while still graceful, had lost some of their fluid precision. The Death Priest pressed his advantage, driving Shiralene back with a series of vicious strikes. One blow slipped past her guard, scoring a line of fire across her arm. Another nearly took her head, missing by mere millimeters as she twisted away. Jimmy dispatched the last of the operatives in his sector and turned his full attention to the central duel. He raised Betsy, seeking a clear shot, but the combatants moved too quickly, too unpredictably. Then, disaster struck. Shiralene stumbled slightly on debris from a shattered pillar, and the Death Priest seized the opening. His blade swept toward her exposed flank with killing intent. Time seemed to slow for Jimmy. There was no conscious decision, only action. He threw himself forward, Betsy configured to maximum output, a setting that would burn out her core, but produce one final, devastating blast. "Hey, ugly!" he shouted. The Death Priest turned slightly, just enough for Jimmy to lock eyes with the faceless helmet. He pulled the trigger. Betsy's dying scream was a beam of pure white plasma that lanced across the hall, striking the Death Priest squarely in the chest. The specialized armor, designed to absorb and redirect energy, couldn't handle the overloaded blast. It cracked, then shattered, the dark energies contained within imploding with catastrophic results. The Death Priest's scream was cut short as his own corrupted power consumed him from within, leaving nothing but smoldering armor collapsing to the floor. Jimmy staggered, dropping Betsy's now useless frame. The overload had sent feedback through the weapon systems, burning his hands and sending tendrils of pain up his arms. But he was alive, and more importantly, so was Shiralene. The Queen straightened, her eyes wide as she took in what had happened. "Human," she began, then corrected herself. "Jimmy, that was—" Whatever she intended to say was lost as the last surviving Syndicate operative, a wounded sniper in the upper gallery, fired a final, desperate shot. Jimmy saw the plasma bolt streaking toward Shiralene and reacted without thinking, lunging to push her aside. The bolt caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the floor. Shiralene's plasma sword flashed once more, finding the sniper with unerring accuracy, before she knelt beside Jimmy's fallen form. "Medic!" she called, her voice carrying the full weight of royal command. "To the ceremonial hall, immediately." Jimmy tried to smile through the pain. "Twice in 1 week," he managed. "You're getting to be a dangerous person to know, Your Majesty." "Be silent," she ordered, though there was no anger in her tone. "Conserve your strength." He coughed, tasting blood. "Betsy's gone," he mourned, glancing at his ruined weapon. "She died a hero." "As might you, if you don't stop talking," Shiralene replied, applying pressure to his wound with surprising gentleness. The Royal Medical Team arrived moments later, quickly stabilizing Jimmy and preparing him for transport. As they lifted him onto a hovering stretcher, Shiralene surprised everyone, Jimmy most of all, by clasping his hand briefly. "The life debt is doubled now," she said quietly. "Twice you have saved me at risk to yourself." Through the haze of pain and whatever drugs the medics had administered, Jimmy found himself grinning. "Does that mean I get a promotion? Royal pain in the ass, maybe?" The corners of Shiralene's mouth twitched upward. "Rest now, human. We will discuss your promotion when you are healed." As they carried him from the hall, Jimmy caught one last glimpse of Shiralene, standing amid the aftermath of battle. Her regal posture restored, but something new in her bearing. Something that might, in a human, have been called respect. Or perhaps something more. Jimmy's recovery was swifter this time. Zarelian medical technology working its wonders on his injured shoulder. Within 3 days, he was well enough to attend the victory ceremony in the Great Council Chamber of the Eternal Vigilance. The Syndicate fleet had withdrawn following the Death Priest's demise, their coordinated attack falling into disarray without his leadership. It wasn't a definitive end to the war, but it was a significant victory, one that had boosted morale throughout the Allied forces. Jimmy stood somewhat uncomfortably at Shiralene's right hand as she addressed the assembled Xyrilian nobles and military commanders. He had been provided with a formal uniform befitting his new status, whatever that was, though he missed the familiar weight of Betsy at his side. "The threat posed by the Seventh Star cult has been neutralized," Shiralene announced, her voice carrying effortlessly through the vast chamber. "The Death Priest's plan to assassinate me and destabilize our defense has failed, thanks in large part to the actions of Lieutenant James Harker of Earth." Murmurs swept through the assembly at this public acknowledgement. Jimmy maintained a respectful stance, though he couldn't resist a small, defiant whistle that earned him several scandalized looks from nearby nobles. "The human invoked the law of life debt without knowing it," Shiralene continued, "when he intercepted an assassin's blade meant for me. Since then, he has doubled that debt by saving my life a second time, at great personal risk." She turned slightly, addressing Jimmy directly. "Step forward, Lieutenant Harker." Jimmy did as instructed, noting the mixture of curiosity, disdain, and reluctant respect on the faces of the assembled Xyrilians. "By the ancient laws of our people," Shiralene proclaimed, "I hereby declare James Harker of Earth to be Shazirith, Royal Protector, the first non-Xyrilian to hold this title in our history." Gasps and exclamations of shock rippled through the chamber. One elderly noble stepped forward, his ornate robes marking him as a member of the High Council. "Your Majesty," he protested, "the title of Shazirith is reserved for those of pure Xyrilian blood, trained from birth in the sacred arts of protection. This human cannot possibly fulfill the traditional requirements." "Tradition must sometimes yield to necessity, Lord Vexus," Shiralene replied calmly. "The law of life debt is older than the tradition you cite. Lieutenant Harker has proven his worth twice over, demonstrating both the skill and the character required of a royal protector." Another council member joined the protest. "The alliance with Earth was meant to be temporary, a strategic necessity only. Elevating a human to such a position risks our very cultural identity." Jimmy remained silent, recognizing that this was a battle Shiralene needed to fight on her own terms. Still, he couldn't help feeling like a prize exhibit in a very alien zoo as the debate continued around him. Finally, a third voice joined the discussion, a female Xyrilian wearing the insignia of the military high command. "I witnessed the human in combat against the Death Priest," she stated. "His tactics were unorthodox but effective. More importantly, he demonstrated absolute loyalty to Her Majesty, with no thought for his own safety." "Commander Talaxia speaks truly," Shiralene affirmed. "In the heat of battle, it is not bloodline that determines valor, but character. Lieutenant Harker has proven his—" The debate continued for some time, with opinion clearly divided between traditionalists who objected to a human holding such a sacred position and pragmatists who recognized the value of strengthening the alliance with Earth through this unprecedented honor. Throughout it all, Shiralene remained resolute, her decision unwavering. Eventually, even Lord Vexus was forced to concede, though his disapproval remained evident in every line of his ancient face. "So be it," he pronounced grudgingly. "Let the human serve as Shazirith. But let the record show that the High Council reserves the right to revisit this decision should any complications arise." "Duly noted," Shiralene replied with regal finality. "The ceremony will proceed." What followed was a ritual, unlike anything Jimmy had experienced before. Ancient words in the Xyrilian tongue, ceremonial exchanges of weapons. He was presented with a new plasma rifle of Xyrilian design to replace his fallen Betsy, and formal oaths that Shirlene translated for him to repeat. By the time it concluded, Jimmy had been officially installed as royal protector, with all the rights, responsibilities, and ceremonial duties that entailed. The assembled nobles and commanders acknowledged him with varying degrees of enthusiasm, from Commander Talaxia's genuine respect to Lord Vexus's barely concealed contempt. As the formal proceedings gave way to a more relaxed celebration, Jimmy found himself approached by a steady stream of curious Aurelians, some seeking to evaluate his worthiness, others genuinely interested in learning more about Earth and its people. Through it all, he maintained the respectful demeanor Shirlene had coached him on, though he couldn't entirely suppress his natural humor, a trait that seemed to mystify many Xerelians, but endear him to a surprising number of the younger nobles. Eventually, the crowd thinned as the hour grew late. Jimmy found himself standing on a balcony, overlooking the crystalline cities of Zoralia below, the planet's twin moons casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. "Your ceremonies last longer than Earth's," he commented, as Shirlene joined him, having shed some of her more elaborate ceremonial regalia. "We believe important transitions deserve proper recognition," she replied, her gaze following his to the vista below. "You conducted yourself well. Only 3 minor breaches of protocol." Jimmy raised an eyebrow. "Only 3? I'm improving." A slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Indeed, though I suspect Lord Vexus counted many more." "He doesn't seem like my biggest fan," Jimmy observed. "Lord Vexus has served the royal house for 6 generations," Shirlene explained. "Change comes slowly to those who have lived so long with tradition as their only constant." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as lights twinkled in the cities below. It was the first time Jimmy had seen Zoralia from the surface, rather than from orbit, and the beauty of the alien world struck him anew. "So," he ventured eventually, "what exactly does a royal protector do, besides the obvious protecting part?" Shirlene turned to face him, her iridescent eyes reflecting the moonlight. "The Shazareth is more than a mere bodyguard. You will be my voice when I cannot speak, my hand when I cannot act. In matters of security, your authority is second only to my own." "That's a lot of responsibility," Jimmy said, suddenly sobered by the implications. "It is," she agreed. "And there will be those who test you, who seek to undermine your position at every turn. The path will not be easy." Jimmy grinned. "When is it ever?" He glanced back at the moons hanging in Zoralia's night sky. "You know, on Earth, we have stories about people who get pulled into strange worlds and grand adventures. They usually end up changing both the world and themselves in the process." "And is that what you believe will happen here?" Shirlene asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "I think it already has," Jimmy replied honestly. "A month ago, I was just another soldier following orders. Now I'm Shay Whatever, the first human royal protector to an alien queen. If that's not life-changing, I don't know what is." "Shay Zareth," Shirlene corrected automatically, but there was warmth in her tone. After a moment's hesitation, she added, "I have not properly thanked you, Jimmy Harker. Twice you have saved my life at risk to your own. The life debt compels me to acknowledge this, but my gratitude extends beyond obligation." Coming from Shirlene, this was tantamount to an emotional declaration. Jimmy recognized the significance of the moment, the proud queen allowing herself a moment of genuine connection with the human who had unexpectedly become so important to her world. "You're welcome, Your Majesty," he replied simply. "Though, if we're being honest, I'd prefer if we could avoid making it a third time. These recovery periods are cutting into my witty banter time." Shirlene's laugh was brief but genuine, a sound Jimmy suspected few had ever heard. "I make no promises. The war continues, and with it, the danger." "Then I guess I'd better get used to this royal protector gig," Jimmy said, straightening his ceremonial uniform. Do I get a crown or something? Maybe a scepter. Do not press your luck, human, Shirlene warned. But the slight curve of her lips belied the severity of her words. As they turned to rejoin the celebration inside, Jimmy caught a glimpse of their reflection in the crystal walls. The tall, regal Xyrillian queen and the shorter, unmistakably human soldier at her side. An unlikely pair, bound by ancient law and forged in battle. One last question, Your Majesty, he said as they walked. This royal protector title, does it make me royalty by association? Shirlene's expression was unreadable. Not precisely, though it does grant you certain privileges.
Like what?
Like the privilege of not being executed for excessive impertinence, she replied smoothly. Jimmy laughed. I'll take it. He offered his arm in a formal gesture he'd been taught during his crash course in Xyrillian protocol. Shall we face the lions together, Your Majesty? After a moment's hesitation, Shirlene placed her hand on his arm, a public acknowledgement of his new status that would not go unnoticed by those within. Together, Shazareth, she agreed, her voice carrying a promise that extended beyond the immediate moment. For as long as the life debt binds us. And as they re-entered the grand hall, side by side, Jimmy reflected that some bindings, even those that began as obligation, could become something far more meaningful with time. The war would continue, the syndicate would regroup, new threats would emerge, and the alliance between Earth and Xyralia would face countless tests in the days to come. But for now, in this moment, a bridge had been built between two vastly different worlds. A bridge that had begun with a human soldier's instinctive leap to save an alien queen, and now extended into a future neither could have imagined. For the first time since his arrival on Xyralia, Jimmy felt truly at home among the stars. As the twin moons of Xyralia cast their gentle light over the crystalline spires of the royal palace, Shirlene and Jimmy stood on the observation deck, the vast cosmos spread before them. 3 months had passed since the defeat of the Death Priest, and Jimmy's unprecedented elevation to royal protector. In that time, the alliance between Earth and Xyralia had strengthened, with diplomatic envoys exchanged and joint military operations launched against weakened Syndicate positions. The Council reports that Syndicate forces have withdrawn from the Mithril sector, Shirlene said, hands clasped behind her back as she gazed at the stars. Your strategy of targeting their supply lines, rather than engaging their main fleet directly, has proven effective. Jimmy smiled, still somewhat surprised when his tactical suggestions were not only heard, but implemented. Earth's history is full of asymmetric warfare. Sometimes the smaller force wins by being smarter, not stronger. A lesson the Xyrillian military has been slow to learn, Shirlene acknowledged. We have traditionally relied on superior technology and straightforward confrontation. That works when you're the biggest kid on the playground, Jimmy replied. But the Syndicate fights dirty. We need to be willing to get a little mud on our boots too. Shirlene turned to him, one eyebrow raised. Another of your Earth expressions? Sorry, Jimmy grinned. 3 months as Royal Protector and I still can't break the habit of human idioms. I find them colorful, Shirlene admitted. Though Lord Vexus nearly suffered cardiac arrest when you suggested the Council cut the crap during last week's strategy session. Jimmy winced at the memory. Not my finest diplomatic moment. But they were talking in circles, and time was critical. Your directness, while occasionally shocking, has its value. Shirlene conceded. She hesitated, then added, The Earth Ambassador has requested your presence at tomorrow's reception. He seems eager to discuss your unique position. Jimmy had been avoiding Earth's newly appointed ambassador, knowing the questions that awaited him. His transformation from lieutenant in Earth's expeditionary force to alien royal protector had created a diplomatic situation without precedent. I'll talk to him, Jimmy sighed. Though I'm not sure what I'll say. Sorry, can't come home. I'm magically bound to an alien queen by ancient space law. Doesn't exactly fit in a standard mission report. Do you wish to return to Earth? Shirlene asked, her tone carefully neutral. Jimmy considered the question seriously. 3 months ago, he would have answered without hesitation. Of course, he wanted to go home. But now. Earth is where I came from, he said slowly. But I'm not sure it's home anymore. Not after everything that's happened here. He gestured to the stars, to Zoralia below, to the space between himself and Shirlene. This mission was supposed to be 6 months. Standard rotation. I'd fight alongside aliens, then go back to my regular unit with some good stories. I never expected. To become Shazareth, Shirlene finished for him. To find another home, Jimmy corrected gently. The title, the ceremonies, the politics, that's all window dressing. What matters is that I'm doing something that makes a difference, protecting someone worth protecting. Shirlene's eyes widened slightly at the implied compliment. The life debt? Forget the life debt, Jimmy interrupted, surprising them both with his boldness. Maybe it brought us together, but it's not why I stay. I stay because this is where I'm needed, where I choose to be. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. You continue to surprise me, Jimmy Harker, Shirlene said finally. When you first saved my life, I viewed the life debt as an obligation, a sacred duty imposed by tradition. I did not expect it to become a partnership, Jimmy suggested when she trailed off. Yes, she agreed, seeming relieved at the word. A partnership that transcends its origins. Jimmy smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. So, partners, then? Not just queen and protector, but actual partners. That would be unprecedented, Shirlene noted, though Jimmy thought he detected a hint of amusement in her tone. I'm getting used to being unprecedented around here, he replied with a grin. First human royal protector, first non-Zeralian to address the High Council, first outsider to make Lord Vexus turn that interesting shade of purple. Your talent for disrupting centuries of tradition is remarkable, Shirlene said dryly. It's a gift, Jimmy agreed cheerfully. So, what do you say? Your Majesty, partners? Shirlene studied him for a long moment, her iridescent eyes unreadable. Then, in a gesture that would have shocked the entire Zeralian court, she extended her hand in the human fashion. Partners, she agreed, as Jimmy took her hand carefully in his. Though I expect this will cause yet another uproar in the council. Let them uproar, Jimmy said, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. We've faced worse. They turned back to the viewport, standing closer than royal protocol would normally permit. Below them, Zoralia gleamed in the light of its twin moons, a world of crystal and gold that had become Jimmy's unexpected home. Above, the stars stretched into infinity, holding both threats and promises for the future. So, Jimmy said after a comfortable silence, does being your partner make me royalty now? Shirlene's lips curved into that rare smile that still caught Jimmy off guard whenever he witnessed it. Do not push your luck, human. You may be Shazareth, but some traditions are beyond even your talent for disruption. Challenge accepted, Jimmy replied with a laugh. Just as long as I don't have to learn the royal dance rituals. Those are, unfortunately, non-negotiable, Shirlene informed him, though her eyes sparkled with what might have been mischief. The ceremony of seasonal transition is approaching, and the royal protector is expected to participate fully. Jimmy groaned dramatically. Facing the death priest was easier than trying to master Zeralian dance steps. Perhaps, Shirlene agreed, but considerably less entertaining for the court to witness. As they stood together, under the light of the twin moons, human and Zeralian, protector and queen, the future stretched before them like the star field beyond the viewport, vast, unknown, and filled with possibilities neither could have imagined when their paths first crossed on a blood-soaked battlefield. The life debt had brought them together, but something stronger would keep them that way. Something that transcended obligation, tradition, and the vast differences between their worlds. Something that, like the partnership they had just affirmed, had no precedent in either of their cultures, but was no less real for its uniqueness. Partners, Jimmy repeated softly, more to himself than to Shirlene. It was enough, for now. The rest would come in its own time, as naturally as the orbit of Zoralia's twin moons, or the cycle of war and peace that had shaped both their lives. For now, they had each other, a war to win, and a future to build, together.